I've always felt that, for a long time until recently I suppose, that for me my work really started to concentrate on conflict and war around 2003, 2004, when our country, along with America, went to war in Iraq. More recently, I've realised that there has been an element that deals with conflict on a broader basis that's been there all along, and perhaps that stems back to my childhood of growing up in Belfast during the Troubles. I think the initial spark for me was with regards to Man on Fire was the very gripping and harrowing images of soldiers clambering from an armoured personnel vehicle in Basra during a riot in September 2005, I think it was. And you could see from these series of photographs that, you know, as they were clambering in panic out of the tank, and there are some photographs of a soldier running away and the flames engulf him. And it's just that particular image became something that really, I suppose, stayed in my imagination. You know, as I said, it started off with something that was more specific to the war in Iraq, but it is something that's probably in more broader terms to do with conflict through the ages, the conflict of passing from life to death. And as you can see with this piece, it's you know, it's this human that's lunging forward as one horrifying mass and trying to desperately hold on to life. The Imperial War Museum is a museum that I've visited many times. As I was walking around the museum, I suddenly turned a corner and saw this object in a glass cabinet and really froze to look at it, and found it quite shocking, actually. Why? Because it seemed to possess an inner life without there being anything inside it. In a sense, it's like an empty vessel. It's a robe. It's something that would have been worn by a sniper during the First World War. But you look at it as it hangs in that glass cabinet, and it looks primitive, primal. It's alive. It's something that could belong perhaps to any time. And you know, you look at it and you realise there's nothing in there. But why does it have such life? It reminds me of the Abu Ghraib figure of the hooded prisoner who was tortured and stood on a box. I chose to recreate this, scale it up to a height of 5.5 meters. It's called Casting a Dark Democracy. It is constructed of steel onto which barbed wire is coiled, and then black plastic has been stretched over the steel and ripped open, and then in front of it there's a 30-foot oil pool filled with sump oil, and you've got this reversed reflection. And so when you walk right up to the oil pool and you look deep into it, you see the reflection of the Abu Ghraib figure. But also the whole idea, well, there's a whole multitude of meanings to it, but one is that you look deeply into this, and it's like looking through time, looking back into time, the depths of time. And there's this phantom form there reminding us of our primitive, primal instincts. It was only 2 weeks ago I'd visited New York and actually went to the Twin Towers or the 9/11 Museum, which in itself is a profoundly harrowing experience. And so to see the bit of twisted metal in the museum, it linked back to the car, It Is What It Is, Jeremy Deller, and it made me think about really how these two bits of metal are actually related to one another, and because obviously the attacks on the Twin Towers on 9/11 led to the war in Iraq, and it was during the war in Iraq that where the car is from. It's from a bombing that happened in 2007. When I go and see the car, and then I walk upstairs and see the remnants from the Twin Towers and how these things relate, one relates to the other. And it's a bit like how you think of conflict. As somebody once said to me, things don't come out of nowhere. Things are not born out of nowhere. They happen for a reason. And there's always a link from one thing to another. The Imperial War Museum is a museum that I've visited many times throughout my life and career. It's a place that's compelling not just for its collection, but it's compelling because it very poignantly reflects an aspect of humanity. Don McCullen, the photographer, he wrote into my book a quotation that I think is quite relevant, and it's a book of his work. And he's written, "Whoever looks at this book has to understand that all I am trying to say, that the world must improve its act so that its people can find hope in the journey through life." And I think that the position of the museum is very much about that, as I've said, it holds up a mirror to the destructive and violent nature of the human species. And in doing so, it shows us a way, perhaps, where we can best improve ourselves.